Oh boy. Oh jeez. Leave it to the Sixers to make a lot of games going down to the wire a living nightmare. Even though they do pull this one out against the Spurs last night, it was hair pulling. It was frustrating to ever living hell that this game had to go down to the wire to begin with. But before we get into any of the negatives, because there are a ton of negatives that go along with this game, let's start with some positives. They do pull out the win, which is very good. Shake Milton has a very nice bounce-back performance after what happened against the Pacers about that terrible performance. Has a great bounce-back performance today. He goes 16-3-5, and he hits the game-winning three. And Shake Milton showed a lot of confidence today, and that's what you need from him. If he's going to be your primary ball handler, I like what he's showing from the confidence side. Hopefully he can keep this consistency up, getting consistent 15-plus points, and just show a consistency with the ball handling, getting some points, making some assists. He needs to be better, and he needs to be more consistent. And this game is a bright sign, because if this is what the rotation is going to look like going down the stretch and into the playoffs, we definitely need this out of Shake Milton. And then going into Joel Embiid, the biggest question mark for him going into the resumption of the season was that calf injury, which was keeping him out of the exhibition games. And the past two games since he's been playing in the regular season, been great. He looks like he's in perfect game shape right now, for now, and he looks amped and ready to go. He's had two dominant performances the past two games. He goes 27-5-9 in last night's game. Really good performance out of Joel Embiid. He's been dominant down in the post. He's been getting those boards. He's been getting those free throws, getting some points, getting those assists. He's been very dominant force for the Sixers right now, and it really has been one of the main consistent players going into this resumption of the season. And another consistent player that has been very good, Tobias Harris, has another great game. He goes another 25-plus point performance, goes 25-4-6. Great performance out of Tobias Harris, and I know there's a lot of people in the Sixers fan base that's having a lot of problems with Tobias Harris. But if he can give you consistent numbers like this night in and night out, he is definitely worth that contract. And some people do not believe that he is worth the money that he's being paid. But if he can give you performances like this every single night, and definitely that's not going to happen every single night, but if he can keep it consistent, that he's going to be worth his contract, and it's going to be a definite force going into the NBA playoffs. It's going to be something good. And then Josh Richardson. He had a much better performance today, but speaking of consistencies, Josh Richardson, we all know what he can do on the defensive side of the ball. He needs to be more consistent on the offensive side. Gets 19 points last night, 2 assists, 1 rebound. We all know what he can do defensively. Needs to be much more consistent offensively. And we all know he should not be the primary ball handler. Sometimes there's certain situations where he is, and it just doesn't show it. He's not that good being the primary ball handler. He's not the guy that's going to go out there and lead the offense. He does need to be better consistently offensively scoring some points, but he's not a guy that can go out there and be that primary ball handler, be that point guard. That's what Shake Milton has to do, and he's doing a better job of it. He needs to be more consistent, and same thing with Josh Richardson. Needs to be more consistent, and consistency is going to be the key with this Sixers team, because there's a lot of moments where it's just very inconsistent. So the biggest gripe with them is them being inconsistent. So that's going to be the biggest key going into these rest of the regular season resumption and going into the playoffs, seeing what players can remain consistent. And speaking of a player that had a very nice bounce back game, Al Horford, even though he went 9-3-6, he was a minus 26 in the game against the Pacers. Terrible. Not a good performance off the bench. Today, plus 17. He was the best plus minus on the Sixers lineup last night. Better performance on the court, and definitely nothing's going to relate to that dud of a game that he had against the Pacers. Much better, plus 17. Just a much better performance right there from Al Horford. So, there's negatives. I'm going to go into the negatives. So, one person in the lineup that was a major negative, Ben Simmons. He had a terrible game, including going back to the Pacers. He was just a terrible defensive performance against the Pacers. Couldn't really do much offensively, even though he did have a nice offensive game against the Pacers. Terrible defensive performance. And last night's game, it was both combined. He had a terrible offensive performance. He only put up 8-5-2. And just defensively, he was taking stupid foul after stupid foul. And going into the second half, he was only 2 for 4 from the field. That's not good enough. Even though we know Ben Simmons does not take jump shots. It's the biggest story going in for the past few seasons. He just doesn't do it for some reason. We get all those hype videos in the off seasons that he's taking jump shots. He's working on them in the gym. Goes into the season, just doesn't happen. So that's the common story from Ben Simmons. But still, going 2 for 4 into the half, it's not good enough. We all know you can't take jump shots, but you can drive the rim. You can drive the basket, get into the paint, get into those dirty areas. We know you can score doing that. Ben needs to do a better job. And on the defensive side, he was just taking stupid foul after stupid foul. And he was getting into foul trouble going into the fourth quarter. He was around 5 personal fouls. That is not good enough. And he eventually does foul out of the game. And that takes a key guy, a key role player, and a key starter out of your lineup going into the fourth quarter. And that's one of the main reasons why the Sixers are allowing 43 points in the fourth quarter against the Spurs. It is not good enough. It's not good enough at all. You just cannot do that. Ben needs to be a lot better. He needs to go to the rim. He needs to get those points in the paint. He needs to show what he can use. Use his strength. Get to the rim. Get those points. And he needs to be a better defender. We all know he's one of the best defensive players in basketball. That's not a lie. That's facts. And in these past 2 games, he's not showing it. Today, last night he took some stupid fouls, and he got himself into foul trouble, which it resulted in him in fouling out. And Ben just needs to be better. And just going off the consistency factor, it feels like with this team, you'll have some nights where these specific players will go off, and then another specific couple players will have a very bad game. And maybe you'll see that for a couple, but then another game you'll see those 2 bad players that were having a bad game in previous will have good games, and then the other players will play bad. It never seems to be that every single player in the lineup is clicking at the same time. It just doesn't feel like that happens. It doesn't feel like it at all. It always feels like there's a little group that plays good, and then another little group that plays bad. There's just no line of, chemistry to play consistent together, if you know what I mean. So it's just weird. Ben Simmons needs to have a much better game. And then just going into that fourth quarter, oh my God, it was terrible. I was pulling my hair out. It was that bad of a performance. You're allowing 43 points in the fourth quarter. You shouldn't be doing that to the Spurs. You shouldn't be doing that in general. It just should not happen. And the game should not be going down to the wire. And that also can be in line to what Brett Brown put out there on the court at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Those rotations. You didn't have Ben because he fouled out. And you're putting out a rotation of Hal Neto, Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle, Tobias Harris, and Al Horford. That's not good enough. That's not going to keep the Spurs off the scoreboard. That's not going to be a good defensive line. That's not going to help you get points. It's not a good rotation at all. I can understand you don't have Ben Simmons to go out there and be the defensive beast that he is, even though he wasn't having a good game to begin with. It's just not a good rotation. And then the one problem is that I'm having a little bit of scary thoughts in my mind is how Brett Brown is utilizing Hal Neto. And it just feels like this guy should not be getting as many minutes as he should be. Even though granted that Ben Simmons did foul out, so maybe his minutes was coming up a little bit. But he should not be gaining as many minutes as he's getting. And that does make me a little scared going into the playoffs on how Brett Brown is going to utilize Neto. So it feels like he's a guy that should not be getting as many minutes. But Brett Brown's continuing to give him a little bit more time. So is he going to be utilized in the playoffs to this extent? Honestly, I feel like he shouldn't be getting as many minutes as he should, but it's going to be a weird process going into the playoffs at this point. And we all know everyone's great with Brett Brown, that he's one of the main issues with this team and the reason why they're not playing up to their performance. Granted, I'm not the biggest Brett Brown fan, but I'm not the biggest Brett Brown hater either. Granted, yes, there's a lot of nights where he makes a lot of terrible decisions, putting some weird rotations out there, and just things he does in general that just make me question what the hell he is doing out there. And there was a little thing in this game where he put Ben Simmons at the 5, he put him at center, even though it was a little tiny bit of action in the game. It was just like, Brett, what are you doing at this point? Why are you putting Ben Simmons at the center position? It's weird. It's very, very weird. And it's just, a game like this should not be going down to the wire. And hopefully this team can find a way to become more consistent and not have those fourth quarter collapses to where Shake Milton has to hit a 3-point game winner with 6 seconds left. Hopefully that doesn't have to be the result every single night. But the way this team is performing right now, with the way they played against the Pacers, the way they played last night against the Spurs, it's just, hopefully that doesn't keep up. Hopefully they can find a way to shut it down defensively in the fourth quarter and pull out some wins. Because they want to get into a better position going into the playoffs. That's a definite. But with these performances, when I look at this team, I still see a second round exit team. I don't see a team that can go to the finals. But who knows, if a team can find a way to get consistent going into the playoffs, maybe they can find some sort of hot streak. Maybe they can get their players going. Get some sort of hot streak going on right here. But players in the lineup need to be more consistent. I like what Joel Embiid is doing. I like what Tobias Harris is doing. Those two, right to me, have been the more consistent players since the games have started up again. Shake Milton, I love what he's doing, needs to be more consistent. Josh Richardson needs to be more consistent. Al Horford needs to be more consistent. He cannot be putting up minus 26, what he did against the Pacers. A plus 17 against the Spurs, much, much better. Hopefully he could put up performances like that. And Ben Simmons, the question is there. He needs to be much better. He needs to be absolutely better. He cannot be fouling out. He cannot be putting up defensive performances like he did last night. Same thing. He cannot be putting up offensive performances. You cannot go 2 for 4 from the field into the half. That's just not acceptable. We all know what Ben can do. He can drive the rim. He can get into the paint. He can get those greasy points. He has the power to do that. And for some reason, he just didn't do it. So, hopefully, the Sixers, they have a game tomorrow at 4 p.m. against the Washington Wizards. Hopefully tomorrow's game will be much better and not hair-pulling like last night's game was. So, what are your thoughts on last night's Sixers game against the Spurs? What do you think of Shake Milton's 3-point game winner? What do you think about Ben Simmons' game? Do you think it was his fault that he played so poorly? Or do you think it was his fault or Brett Brown's fault? Because sometimes Brett Brown gets more of the blame than the players. So I want to hear, do you blame Brett Brown more on the performance from the Sixers, or do you blame the players? So don't forget to leave a comment in the comment section. Don't forget to drop a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And I will see you next time.